All right, welcome back to the DTVC Extra podcast. We are going to finish our look at the Star Trek original cast series. We'll be looking at numbers 5 and 6 today. I had thought about, I'd considered maybe doing those 3 new ones, the Chris Pine ones, as sort of another episode. And so I guess it would be a 4th episode in this series. But one, I thought kind of 4 episodes was too much. I think if I ever did do it, like it would kind of fit well with, just from a number of movies standpoint, with the Next Generations ones, right? So if you do Generations, First Contact for one episode, and then Insurrection, Nemesis for another episode, and then do the 3 new ones for a 3rd episode, it would kind of fit nicely there. So that was one thought I had there. So in 2 weeks, what we'll be doing is we'll go to the Ip Man series, Donnie Yen. So hopefully those will still be on Tubi. But so in 2 weeks, we'll do Ip Man 1 and 2, and then 2 weeks after that, we'll be doing 3 and 4. And then, for what'll come after that, it's kind of up in the air. One idea I had was doing the Superman movies, because those are all on Max except for Supergirl. And I think I'd want to do Supergirl, so like maybe I would do like Superman 1 and 2 for the first one. And the other thing too is I don't know if I can get my hands on the Donner cut, so I'd only be able to do the kind of original version of number 2 that's on Max. But then I do like maybe 3 and Supergirl, and then 4 and the Brandon Ruth one, the Superman Returns. So it's one idea I had for coming up after Ip Man, but we'll see. We'll kind of see what's available. I'll kind of look for, because I think the big thing is I want to make sure that they're available on some kind of streamer, because I don't want to pay to rent too many of them if I'm doing this. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But anyway, at least you'll know in 2 weeks we'll start doing the Ip Man ones. But for right now, we've got to finish up the Star Trek ones, which we're going to start looking at number 5 here, and then the next segment we'll look at number 6. Number 5, right? The infamous Star Trek 5, The Last Frontier, The Final Frontier. This is the one, right? I think between this one and the first one, I think that's kind of how people are, which one they think is the worst of these, right? And for me, I couldn't even remember if I had seen this one before. I remember trying to see it. I've talked about this on previous episodes. My buddy and I tried to marathon them when we were house sitting for another friend who had them all on VHS, and I fell asleep during number 5. So I remember the early part of number 5, like when Cybok is there, and he Kirk is climbing El Capitan. He's free climbing, and Spock shows up with the rocket shoes and stuff like that, or the rocket boots, or whatever that was. So I remember all of that. And then I fell asleep somewhere. And when I was watching it this new time, when you see like kind of the face of God or whatever with the alien, and it's like all blue, and he looks like I don't know, like Santa Claus or something like that. When I saw that, I was like, I remember that. That looks really familiar. So I thought maybe I had seen it, but it's possible too that when I fell asleep watching it that time, that maybe I woke up in kind of a fever dream and just started seeing this blue face on the screen and kind of went back to sleep or something, and that's how I remembered it too. So best we could say is maybe this is my first watch when we did this one. Now number 6, when we talk about that one, I did see that one in the theater, which I'll get into a little bit more when we talk about that. Before we get stuck in on number 5, I want to kind of put that one in context, kind of the way I've been doing with the other ones here. So one thing to think about, 1989, if you've ever looked at 1989 for a year, it's an interesting one, right? Because when we think of what we talked about in previous episodes about sort of like the start of the new form of the blockbuster, right? That like previously, like in the 50s and 60s, you had epics like Lawrence of Arabia or Dr. Zhivago, things like that, Ben-Hur. And then in the mid 70s with like Jaws and Star Wars, you get this new kind of blockbuster that's forming these sort of, I don't want to say mini franchises, but they're, you think of it like the Star Trek, right, which it gets up to like 6 is kind of the biggest of those, right? Usually it's like 3 movies, maybe a 4th, and then you're done. But that's what it's sort of spawning all of these. And in 1989, it's almost like this convergence of all of these newly formed franchises, right? So the number 1 movie that year, 89, is Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, right? Back to the Future Part 2 is number 3 on that list. Lethal Weapon Part 2 is number 6. Ghostbusters 2 is in there, right? That's another one. But also you get some that are new ones that are starting, right? So you got Batman, you got Look Who's Talking, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I don't know if Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, did that one spawn theatrical sequels, or was that something that was more like direct-to-video sequels? I'm not sure. And of course, Little Mermaids, right, is just sort of furthering the Disney cartoon thing. That was a big budget thing for them. Of course, right, we think of like Batman. I mean, Batman sort of changes the game at that point. I don't think people expected in '89 that Batman was going to be the number 2 grossing film of that whole year. I think if you're Paramount and you're making Star Trek, right? You're thinking like, okay, we're going to be in pretty good shape here. One of the things that I read about with Star Trek V was that they had initially planned to release it during Thanksgiving weekend, which is I think roughly when all of them are released, sometime in the fall like that. But they wanted to mix it up with these other blockbusters in the summer. And to be honest, I mean, Star Trek V does pretty well out of the gate, right? It's the number 1 grossing film for that weekend. It bumps Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade out of the number 1 spot. So at that point, right, Paramount's got the 1 and 2 movies in the theater at that time. But then like word of mouth starts to get around about people not really liking the film, and it just kind of plummets from there. And I think it'd be interesting because we can look at some of the other decisions that were made that probably hampered this film, and as we talk about it some, kind of get a sense of like is this one as bad as it sounds, right? Which I don't know. We'll kind of see, as we start talking about it here, we'll kind of get into some of these different things here. So anyway, I'm going to do a quick synopsis here of number 5. So number 5, I don't know that it takes place immediately after part 4. But anyway, it starts off, right, our crew are kind of doing their shore leave thing. So you've got like Shatner or Kirk free climbing El Capitan in Yosemite National Park while Spock is hanging around with his thruster boots or whatever they are. And, McCoy is just hanging out, just like eating beans or whatever, washing them. And then back, at Mount Rushmore National Park, you've got Sulu and Chekhov hanging out, while Uhura and Scotty are on the Enterprise. At the same time, this mysterious figure, Sybok, is on this planet, this sort of like the international peace or intergalactic peace planet, Nimbus 3. And he gets a ragtag bunch of whatever, angry farmers or whatever together, and they take over the one city there, Paradise City, which is kind of like a Tatooine-esque location that has a representative of the Romulans, Klingons, and the Federation there. And he takes them prisoner, and he kind of announces his demands, and Starfleet's like, well, we got to bring the best, right? We got to send the best out there, and that's Kirk and his crew in the Enterprise. So they go out there, and it turns out that Sybok was doing this all as a ruse. He ends up taking over the ship, and we find out 2 things about Sybok, right? One is that he wants to go find God, and he wants to go through this area called the Great Barrier to get to kind of the center of the Milky Way and find God there. So that's one thing. The other thing is that he's Spock's half-brother. And so he's using his Vulcan powers to essentially brainwash everybody, all the crew, except for Spock and McCoy. He kind of brainwashes, but then McCoy, when he sees that it's not working on Spock or Kirk, he kind of relents as well. And then they kind of come to some sort of detente after some cat and mouse back and forth, escaping the brig, that kind of thing. They come to an agreement and agree, okay, we'll all go to see if we can go find this God person on the planet. They go to this planet, and there's this being there, this massive force. And the force says, hey, I want to merge myself with your starship and get out of here. And Kirk goes, well, what does God want with a starship, right? It's a natural question. And of course, God does like any politician or someone who doesn't want to answer a question does, right? He just sort of deflects and starts saying something else. And Spock's like, but you didn't answer his question. He wants to know what God wants with a starship. And so now God gets angry, and he starts, and then of course Sybok's like, well, why would God be zapping people? And he's using kind of like the electricity, right, that the Emperor uses in Return of the Jedi. And Sybok attacks God, or whatever this being is. And then Spock and McCoy beam back to the ship, and Kirk's got to deal with him. And luckily, they're able to convince the Klingon ship to fire. Or actually, Spock gets on a Klingon ship that was chasing them. He gets on board, and he blows up this godlike figure, and they all get out of there and hit the road, and that's the movie. I think from a story standpoint, I think Roddenberry had complained because he wanted the first movie to be like something where the crew meet God, and of course that doesn't end up happening. And they end up doing whatever, the V'ger thing, where they're kind of talking about kind of doing a reverse where humans are the God, right? They're the creators. I think that, the issue, of course, is like we don't really know what this creature is that they find on the planet. We don't know if it's God or what it's doing. It's not really explained that well. One of the big issues with this, unfortunately, is that Industrial Light and Magic, that did the special effects for the previous films, it did a fantastic job. They were kind of the standard in the business at that time. They were busy. They couldn't do this movie. So they end up doing, I think they did, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And there was another film that came out, I think, around this time that they also did. I don't know if it was one of those top movies. I don't know if maybe it was Back to the Future Part 2. I don't know. They did another movie, though, at this time. So they were doing two movies, and they couldn't help out with Star Trek. The other thing is that Paramount wanted to capitalize on the momentum from Star Trek 4, and they felt like that momentum was getting away from them a bit, so they rushed this one a bit. So it was, they start production in 88 and kind of get it out there as soon as they can in 89. Shatner's first directorial role, and I think Shatner had some big ideas for this, and then, the budget wasn't there. I think when they saw the special effects and realized, there's sort of two components with the special effects. Is that one, it wasn't Industrial Light and Magic, so they weren't the best of the best, right? I mean, they were good, they were competent, but they weren't the best of the best. And then two, the shooting schedule meant they had less time to do this, and so you have a less expert team with less time to make the magic happen. So it fell short there. So I think those were kind of the biggest things, right? That hampered this one. But I think too, from a story standpoint, this story isn't anywhere near as fun as the previous movie. And I know that they were looking to kind of get back into more of a drama thing, whereas the first movie is this sort of like this adventurous romp, and they wanted something a little bit more, I don't know if serious is the right word, but they wanted something else in there. And but this, this story doesn't quite work the way that one did. I think that one was just like this fun romp time. I mean, we don't get those kind of fun rompy. We get some kind of fun rompy moments, like when they first get captured by Sybok and they're on the ship. Sybok takes Spock, Kirk, and McCoy to the brig, and they have to escape. And some of that stuff is fun, right? Like when Scotty is like banging Morse code, telling them to stand back so he can blow the wall away, and then they're like climbing up this ladder, and Spock comes up with his rocket boots and he starts flying away, and he's like, oh, I'll just fly out of here and fly them out, whatever. There were some fun moments like that. There was some fun stuff like that in there, but it wasn't what Part 4 was. And I mean, granted, that's maybe not its fault, right? It didn't need, Part 4 was really good, and this maybe wasn't going to quite get there. I read that like. Kurt, or that Shatner, he saw the initial responses and thought, hey, this thing looks like it's going to be pretty good. And then it just kind of fell flat, like immediately after that big opening weekend. I do wonder if this movie was made today, with a big opening weekend like that, like if it had the kind of opening weekend this did, where it's bumping the #1 picture of the year out of the top spot for that weekend, right? Because Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is the #1 movie that year. So, the Paramount did end up having a hit that year, and having the biggest hit with that movie. But you think of like, I don't know, right now I think it's that Inside Out cartoon that's the #1 movie in the country. And if something came around and knocked it out, right? If a Star Trek movie came out, if Star Trek 5 comes out and it knocks that out of the top spot, but it's not that great of a movie, it's not fantastic, would there be a word of mouth kind of thing that would get people to not want to see it? Because that's really what fells Star Trek 5 here, is that once word of mouth gets out that this wasn't the tour de force that the first one was, that's the kind of thing. So I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like nowadays, right, if you're the #1 picture in the country, everybody's going to want to start going to see it, because you start just seeing it everywhere, right? Like you see the commercials, the #1 movie in the country. And I mean, how much do people talk to each other about movies nowadays? That same kind of word of mouth kind of thing. Now you're seeing it on Twitter, you're seeing it that way. And Twitter can be manipulated in ways that word of mouth can't, right? Like Twitter, you see it all the time on Twitter, that you'll see like Trump supporters will take a hashtag to try to make it like a pro-Trump thing, and then anti-Trump people will then subvert the hashtag themselves and use it for other things. And so the ways that a studio could do that like Paramount could alter it and make it just like, so everybody go see this. Hey, look at how much everybody likes this movie. Go see it. And suddenly it's a top trending topic on Twitter all the time about how good it is. Yes, you'd see people like saying, I don't really like it. The other thing too, right, is that if you say you don't really like a Star Trek movie on Twitter, you might get a backlash from, you might get the backlash from hardcore fans, right? The way that you see it, like when, if you say something about a character or something like that, that people really love, right? They go to work and they just go nuts on you there. That might be what happens there where, I see it, for example, I see it big time with sports in Boston, where on Twitter, for the Boston sports, like the Twitterati people are like so pro Boston, right? And it's like you can't say anything bad about a Boston sports team because they will just definitely pile on and kind of just really really go for it there. And you get the sense, right? For example, you get a Boston sports personality who a radio personality who's been doing it for like 10 or 15 years and making probably like millions of dollars a year, right? That's the kind of contract they have. Their show's that popular. We have two in the Boston area, Felger and Maz, or two radio personalities. They break records for how great their ratings are. But if you went on their Twitter pages, right, you would just see all these Boston sports fans like, oh, you hate the Red Sox, oh, you hate Boston teams, like you need to get out of here. They need to replace you. You guys suck. Nobody should whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, that's like this group of Twitter people that looks like a lot. Like if you see 100 people on Twitter commenting on this saying how bad this person is, you think like, oh wow, yeah, if that's a good relative sample, people must hate this guy. Yet everybody's listening to them, and when you listen to the calls, it's like the people who call in, it's kind of a similar thing. Like some of them are are be critical of the Boston teams, but a lot of them are like, oh, why do you hate the Celtics so much? That kind of thing, and they feel because for them that they see this sort of like this echo chamber thing, they think like, everybody in Boston hates these two guys. But it can't be that everybody in Boston hates those two guys when they're so popular. And I love listening to them. I love their takes on Boston sports. I love when they make fun of the callers and the homers and all of that. And so it's a way that you can sort of alter the narrative, right? That like if you didn't know any better, you'd say that these 100 people commenting on this person's this Boston sports personality's opinion are representative of how everybody in the city feels about this person. And I think movie studios can do the same thing. I mean, Netflix was great at it with things like, what was it, Bird Box? Was that the movie? Like those kinds of things where they would just generate this buzz online and make you think that everybody was watching this movie. And of course, they have no way of proving how much people watch these movies or not, but they would create that buzz that way. So I do kind of think if Star Trek V came out now, that's what would happen. That opening weekend would be so big that it would generate the kind of buzz that it would kind of perpetuate. That's just my thought on it. Maybe I'm not giving modern viewers enough credit, but the word of mouth thing doesn't quite work the same way that it used to, because we aren't talking to each other as much like that anymore. So anyway, so I do think that was part. That was the thing that like, okay, once it started off great, but then once that word of mouth came out, the momentum died and the movie started to die out there. I think the other thing is that I think it was a miscalculation to put this thing up against the other blockbusters that were coming out that summer. But when you think about it, right, if you think about where Star Trek was in the 80s, Star Trek was one of the first of these these new franchises, right? So you've got Jaws, Star Wars, Superman, Star Trek, right? That's kind of the order. I was trying to think if there's any earlier ones that I'm missing here, but I don't think so. Because then you get, Indiana Jones, early 80s, right? Back to the Future, Ghostbusters. They start coming, that Terminator, they all start kind of flowing in, that Lethal Weapon, Beverly Hills Cop. You start seeing more of them then. But initially, right, Star Trek was one of 4. And, you think about it, if you only got 4 franchises, right? Star Trek's got a good name there, and there wasn't a lot of competition with them. But by the time '89 comes around, right, all of these things, I mean, Home Alone, all these things are generating buzz, and there's a lot that they have to fight with. And so I wonder, I feel like if the movie was better, it probably would have made its way into the top 10 as a top 10 earner that year. So I don't know that it would have been this much of a flop. But I also think, the environment had changed a lot. I don't want to say the ecosystem. I would say, the market. The market had changed a lot since between when the first Star Trek movie came out and when, the new one. Now, it's interesting because when you think about something like Star Wars that kind of just stayed out of the game for so long, and it almost like, I think in its absence, it grew and that's when that Phantom Menace movie became so big. But it's interesting because I don't know. When I look at this movie, I mean, yes, I think I'm letting it off the hook a little bit by coming up with like these other reasons for why it didn't do so hot. The movie is flawed, right? It has issues with it, and I think it's one of those deals where this is one of those rules, right? When you rush a movie out because you're more concerned about not wanting to go too long between chapters or iterations or whatever movies in the series, that's always going to be a problem, right? You're always going to run into issues there with that. I think that's just I don't know of any time where a movie was rushed into production that it ended up doing better. I don't know if that's ever happened before. So there's that there. I mean, yes, there's things like the God idea. I mean, the blue face kind of thing. I'd heard that they were going to do even crazier things that they had to just dump because they didn't look good. They were going to do these rock monsters, which I guess Galaxy Quest ended up using them when they were doing the parody of Star Trek. So you had some of those kinds of things as well. So yeah, I mean, I guess if I'm ranking the movies, right, and of course I shouldn't wait till I do number 6 to rank them, but I didn't hate this movie. I think that's the thing, is I think people talk about 5 like it is like the worst thing that's ever happened. And like I think, like, for example, if I was going to mix up these 6 movies with the 6 Star Wars movies, right? So the 4, 5, and 6, and then 1, 2, and 3. If I was going to kind of jumble those all up together, I mean, I definitely would put 5 above Phantom Menace, right? I think that this is better than Phantom Menace. I don't know if I'd put it above any of the other 5 Star Wars movies, but definitely I would put it above Phantom Menace. So I don't think it's that bad, at least. I don't even know if I would put Star Trek 1 below Phantom Menace. I almost feel like that's the below, and then it's almost like then you start kind of staggering, I mean, I think for Star Wars, I think it probably like 4, 5, and 6 are probably better than any of the Star Trek ones. I don't know, maybe Wrath of Khan and you could put above Return of the Jedi, maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm such a huge Admiral Akbar fan that it's hard for me. I'm a little soft, and also I love Lando Calrissian, who's in both Jedi and Empire Strikes Back, so that's kind of a little why I'm a little bit partial to those, but but definitely, I mean, I think, as much heat as this movie gets, I don't think it's as bad. It's not the kind of flops that we start to see when we get into the 90s and the 2000s, where we start to see some really, really rough ones, right? I always talk about that 2015 Fantastic Four movie. That's just, rough. Catwoman, Elektra. I mean, this movie, Star Trek V doesn't really reach that kind of level for me. Madam Web might be a good comp. That might be, but I even think this might be better than Madam Web. So, is its reputation deserved? Yeah, maybe, right? But I don't. It's not a hard sit, I guess, is maybe what I would say. Like, I didn't find myself watching it and being like, man, I got to get this thing over with. And I think when I went into it, I was thinking that. I was like, oh, man, I'm putting myself through Star Trek V. This is going to be rough. And then I was watching, I was like, wait, I'm already 45 minutes in on this thing, which is rare for me to be like, I'm already 45 minutes in. Usually I'm like checking that bar and trying to figure out, how much I've got left. So, so there's that there. I was trying to think of some other little tidbits or things about this one. One is there's this scene where they're all sitting around the campfire, and Spock has this like thing that like generates marshmallows, or kind of spits marshmallows out, this like little gun kind of thing. Was it the Jet Puff Marshmallow Company? I think that was the one. They actually had that gun. They sold that gun, and you could buy it. I never had it, but I'd seen it around. I think I want to say I saw it at like a Goodwill or something. Didn't really know what it was, and then I saw Trekkies. I think they had it in Trekkies. They featured it there, and I was like, oh man, I could have bought that. I mean, I don't know if I would be putting marshmallows in it, but the idea was that you put marshmallows, you loaded the gun up with the marshmallows, and it spit them out the way that Spock's did in the movie. It was like one of those things where you had the UPC codes, right? You'd send the UPC codes in, you could get it. So, yeah, I mean, I remember number 5 being in the theater. I was not a big Star Trek fan at that time, so it's not until the 6th one that my friend Mike Palos, who he moved to our area and around that time, early 90. 91, and he was a Star Trek fan. He got me into Star Trek more, and we got into it more for Next Generation, or he was more of a Next Generation, but we watched the old series as well, and we were a fan of that as well. So that's why I would see 6 in the theater, but I wouldn't have seen this in the theater. But I remember it being advertised. I remember being around. But I mean, I think about that period. I remember that period somewhat. That last. I mean, I was 10. So I mean, obviously, I remember Last Crusade coming out. Like, that was huge. That one was everywhere. The Sean Connery commercials. I mean, that was a big one. Ghostbusters 2, I remember because I got the chicken pox around that period, and for the most part they weren't so bad, but I got them on the soles of my feet. And so Ghostbusters 2 had just come out either on VHS or it was on HBO. I can't remember back then because it wasn't always clear if it was going to be on HBO. I think it was Showtime, HBO, and then sometimes VHS would either be before, during that time period, or even after that time period. So I don't remember if it was on VHS, kind of for everybody, or you could rent it or something. But my mom's friend, who actually her son was my friend, but we weren't as close as my mom and her were. They had HBO, and they would record all the new movies that were out at that time, and they recorded. Ghostbusters 2, and so I had this thing with the chicken pox where they're really bad in the soles of my feet. My mom was going through all these different remedies, and nothing was working. Finally, our family doctor was like, "You tried just ocean water, just salt water?" Of course, growing up in Maine, we live near the beach, and so I took a walk in the water in the beach. This was probably it was when I got them, because I remember I discovered I had them when I was playing Little League. So Little League would have been probably early part of the summer. So it was still probably a little cold out at that time. But I remember walking in the water and being "Oh, this feels amazing." So my dad just took a 5-gallon bucket and just filled it up with seawater and our ocean water. And, we brought it home. And I don't know if you can even do that nowadays. I don't know if you can go to the beach and just take a 5-gallon bucket and fill it with water and take it with you. But that's what he did. And we plopped it down in the living room, and I stuck my feet in the bucket and just watched these movies. And Ghostbusters 2 is probably the only one that I remember out of all of those ones that my mom's friend, with those VHSs. And so that would have been around that time as well. And of course, I remember too, the Bobby Brown song that was, for for that one. I remember Lethal Weapon 2. I remember seeing that one with my dad when it was on TV. And the thing I remember most about that one was my dad was calling out every trope. And I was younger at that time. Again, I'm 10, 11 years old. I think it was a free HBO weekend that we were watching it on. And I didn't really know these tropes, these action tropes. And I mean, he's just nailing everyone before it happens. There's that scene where Patsy Kensit gets killed, and he's like, "Oh yeah, okay, go chase the car now, go chase the car." And you see Mel Gibson run out of the house and start running down the street. I'm like, dude, he's nailing it. He's got everyone. I think one of the things that got me into action movies was that moment, which again, I don't think my dad even remembers that. I can't imagine he would even remember doing that. But for me, when you're younger, of course, you remember these things much more strongly than the adults around you do, because there's so many things for them to remember. But as a kid, these things get imprinted on you. And that was one of the most fun ones for me, was just watching that movie with him. Because, I grew up with these movies, watching action movies on TV and just thinking that they were kind of just, I don't know if say canon is the right word, but what they were doing was always right. There was nothing fugazi or tropish or anything like that about what they were doing. And so to have my dad predict what was going to happen in the movie before it happened, because they were just nailing every cliche, it kind of opened my eyes. It kind of actually made action movies more fun for me than they had been. So that, again, that's 1989 for me at that time. So Star Trek V was kind of away from that. That wasn't really something that I was cognizant of, beyond the fact that the commercials were on all the time, that there was toys and stuff like that. But I didn't really understand it that way. And I think when we get into this next segment here, because we're about to wrap this one up, when we get into the one on number 6, I think it'll be interesting to to kind of talk about kind of the, I don't know, say Wither Trek, is that the term we want to use? But where Star Trek is going with all of that. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else from this one that and anything else that was in here that we might have missed. One of the things is we had Spice Williams Crosby, who played one of the Klingon women. She recently has been doing movies with this director Asif Akbar, and one of the movies that she was in was Astro, a Gary Daniels movie that we had her in. So interesting that she was here in in Star Trek V, and now we're seeing her in Astro with Gary Daniels. So that's always an interesting one there. But yeah, I think that's kind of everything here for this one. So Number 5, not as bad as you remember, but also like when you're ranking your Trek films, I don't know that you're going to bump anything down as a result of it. So I don't know that it's better than any of the other ones that people think are better than it. So why don't we do this? We'll take a break, and we come back. We're going to wrap this thing up with part 6, number 6, The Undiscovered Country. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle. All right, we are back, and we're looking at Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. So, interesting, I just recorded episode on Wanted Man, the new Dolph movie, with Mitch from Video Vacuum. And part of our conversation, we were talking about streamers and how there's almost like this shell game or three card. My New England accent just came out of nowhere there, but 3-card Monty kind of deal with the streamers, right? And how something's on one streamer and then the next thing you know it's on another streamer, right? And this has happened a lot more frequently because of the fact that the different streaming services, they don't want to bucket their products so much, right? So Disney doesn't want to just keep all the Marvel stuff to themselves. They want to lease it out to like Max or Netflix or one of those other ones. And so what that means, right, is that you can kind of find these things anywhere. And what's happened with the original Star Trek movies was that they were on Max for some reason, while the rest of the Star Trek stuff was on Paramount Plus. Well, what happened was I watched Star Trek V on Monday on Max, and then went last night to watch, Tuesday night to watch 6, but it wasn't on Max anymore. Now, some things had been added back to Max that I've been meaning to see, like Network, for example. That's a movie I've been meaning to see for a long time, and it was, finally it's back on Max, so I could check it out. But I was like, okay, well, now where am I going to find number 6? I got to watch it for this episode. Well, Paramount had it back again, so it's back on Paramount. And I think also Prime now has the original ones. But anyway, everything's back on Prime. I'm sorry, everything's back on Paramount. So that whole kind of 3-card Monty thing, it's like you just never know when you open up your streaming service now who's going to have what. Thinking like Max, right? Max has all the DC stuff, but then like Wonder Woman's on Tubi, or The Flash is on Netflix, and then of course, right, the CW Arrowverse DC stuff is all on Netflix, right? So everything is kind of everywhere. So just kind of how it is. But anyway, so I did, that was how I watched number 6. Now, going back to 1991, right? Young 12-year-old Matt saw movie number 6 in the theater. So I was in 6th or 7th grade at that time. I think I was in 6th grade. I don't know. I would have been 12, so maybe I was in 7th grade at that point. But anyway, one of our teachers, I don't know if he owned one of the movie theaters in town, or if he worked at the movie theater and his family all worked there together with him. I feel like he owned it, though. I feel like he part owned it or whatever. But it was funny because I don't remember what the theater's name was, but I remember my friend Petrowski, his dad called it the Jerry Lewis Theater. So it must have been called the Jerry Lewis Theater at some time. He would always refer to it as the Jerry Lewis Theater. I remember we had 2 movie theaters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. One was near where the bowling alley was, and then the other one's near the mall area, which is still, it's been renovated a few times. I think the current location is an IHOP or an Aldi or something, where the one that we would go to. But now it's like, I think it's like a Cinemagic or something like that. But it was like Hoyt's, I think was the company. But I remember Petrowski and I saw Wolf, and his dad was late to pick us up after seeing Wolf, and he was like, oh, thought you guys were at the Jerry Lewis Theater. Sorry about that. We were like, oh, what the hell is the Jerry Lewis Theater? It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, that's where we saw Star Trek V. So it was like one of those things, like for being on the honor roll, we got free tickets. And I guess because, I was talking to my friend Mike Palis that I saw this movie with. I was talking with him about this when I was visiting in New England, because he's in my hometown. So it makes it easier. So when I go to visit my parents, he's there. I can go hang out with him. He's got a cool fire pit in the backyard. So my sweatshirt still smells like smoke because I haven't washed it yet since I've gotten back. But it's always a nice deal, especially being here in the city, to be able to sit near fire pit or something like that and hang out and do that. But we were talking about it, he's like, why would we go see that movie? Why would they take us to see that? It was like kind of a rough movie for 12-year-olds, but it's PG. And I think at that time, this is like near Christmas, right? This movie came out close to Christmas. I don't remember what other PG movies were in the theater at that time. You look at 91 as a year for films, right? There were definitely some kids movies. Hook, I guess, would have been one. I don't remember when Hook came out. Hook came out, was it before this? I can't remember. Obviously, Terminator is not one that they're going to be showing us. I remember that one I remember seeing that one in the theater. I remember that one. I think somebody's mom signed. You get signed in for that kind of thing, so we got signed in for that one. But 91 is a little bit less of the franchise than 89 was, right? Yes, Terminator's there, but when you look kind of everything else, Naked Gun, I guess, in Addams Family, I guess we're kind of franchise-ish. But really, it's mostly kind of one-offs. JFK, Silence of the Lambs, right? Hook was a one-off. Beauty and the Beast, Robin Hood, Cape Fear. Remember Scorsese's remake of Cape Fear? That was a number 9 grossing film for 91. So Scorsese making a top 10 film there, right? We don't think about that anymore, right? We think of him making these 3-hour bloated things that with no intermissions, right? So I'm not saying it's good or bad that they're over 3 hours, but they need to have an intermission. Come on, Marty, put an intermission in your movies. But anyway, I was thinking at that time that probably was, they saw it was PG. The other thing too is it might not even been that whether there was a lot of options or not that were PG. It might have just been that they saw that it was PG and thought, well, if it's PG, then it's going to be fine for them. And it's not like it was horrible, but you got the Romulan ale stuff with kind of the back and forth there that was a little adultish. We kind of laughed out loud when Shatner makes the Hitler joke when he one of the Klingons says, "We need room to breathe," and he goes, "Hitler, 1938." Again, that rule about making jokes about Hitler, right? And you're making it as a reference saying you're as bad. I guess that actually now that you think about that, probably was a little bit of a rough joke that like maybe you don't make that joke, but we thought it was funny when we heard it. Definitely that the assassination scene, right, is pretty bloody. And one of the things I read was to keep the PG rating, they gave the Klingons purplish, like I don't know, magenta-ish colored blood, like that pinkish purple blood. It looks like when you get like strawberry frosting or something, or I don't know, like a kind of like a berry frosting on a donut. Like a place that's like like a fancier elevated donut place that doesn't just do like strawberry frosting, but does like like some kind of like strawberry basil kind of thing, that's what, or like a lavender donut, that's what the color of their blood looked like. And I guess by not making it red blood, that also secured them a PG rating. But yeah, so we saw that in the theater. Watching it this time around, I think this is the first time I've seen it since then, to be honest. I don't remember seeing it any time between then. Because, when we talked about my buddy and I tried to do that marathon, he had fallen asleep by 4 and I fell asleep during 5. And so, of course, remember, we were doing VHS, right? We weren't doing like streaming when we were doing that marathon. So you would have had to have been awake to get up, eject one tape, and put the next tape in. Talking about putting the tapes in, that just sounds. I always think of that routine. I don't know if you've heard the Dave Attell routine where he talks about how he doesn't go jogging. He's like, I never go jogging because joggers are the ones who always find the dead bodies on the side of the road. And he's like, that doesn't happen like when you're watching porn at home. Like, oh, I was changing tapes and then I saw this foot from underneath the drapes, And so, so I don't know, whenever I say I'm changing tapes, it sounds like I'm watching porn or something like that. But no, we were, but anyway, you had to physically be awake to watch the next movie, right? It's not like now where it's like, they kind of go to the next thing. One of the things about this is, the credit sequence in this is is cool, right? Because it's got them it's got all their signatures, like they're signing off on the series. And when I'm watching this on Paramount's like, well, we're going to start the next movie on you. And they were starting number 5 too, which is really weird. Like the algorithm's like, oh, you just watched number 6? Let's start number 5 for you. That's what you're probably going to want to watch after seeing number 6, is the one that came before it, right? Does that happen a lot? But that's what they did. And so what I had to do to watch the credits was I had to, because they just started the next movie, I tried to like turn it off and I couldn't. I had to reopen the movie and use like the bar and kind of fast forward all the way to the very end where the credits were. And if you do it that way, if you skip to the credits, they're like, well, God, this loser actually wants to watch the credits, so we won't make anything else happen there. But I mean, credits have become this thing, right? If you think about it, like I think this started like in the early 2000s when you would watch a movie on TV and they would or a TV show on TV and watch anything on TV. The credits would be in like one box and the next show would be starting on the other box, right? It's like almost like they don't want to lose you to the credits. They're so afraid. It's like this frightening thing for them, this idea that no, if there's credits, people are going to get up and walk away. They're going to leave. They're going to go, and we're going to lose them forever, and we'll never be able to get them to watch another movie unless we start the next movie. And if we start the next movie, they're just going to stay there. They may pause and go to the bathroom, but at least they'll have started the next thing. I don't know if you notice this too with Tubi. What Tubi does is they'll start the next movie, right? And when I stop it, because I don't want to watch that next movie. I've watched the one movie I want to watch. Now I'm, logging on Letterboxd and doing all the things you do after you watch a movie now. They'll give me this flash across the screen that says, "How would you rate that movie?" And it's like, you mean that movie that I turned off after like 2 seconds because you just started it automatically? You want to know what I thought of those 2 seconds that I watched there? Yes, I got to see a portion of one of the 5 production companies that had a piece of this DTV movie. That's what I saw. Thank you. Yes, I'll give it a thumbs up. That's perfect. I don't know. I guess it's part of that thing, the whole computer thing, right? That it's like it just doesn't know what it's doing. And it only does what people tell it to do. And if people don't tell it to do smart things, then it's going to be obnoxious. But anyway, so why don't I get in on the movie? Because I'm already talking about the end credits. So why don't I discuss what the film is about first here? And then we'll kind of get in on the movie a bit, and then we will kind of talk about kind of whither Trek, where this whole thing is going for Star Trek. So this movie takes place. I actually don't know if it takes place after Part 5. It's almost like Part 5. I heard that there were some things where they kind of tied it into some other things, but there isn't really a mention of Part 5. It's almost like Part 5 doesn't happen when we start with number 6. But anyway, number 6, we find out that Sulu's got his own ship. He's the captain of the Excelsior, and he comes across a massive explosion, and it turns out this planet that has like whatever fuel the Klingons use to fuel their empire and their war-making ways. It's blown up. And once this moon fully blows up, it's going to pollute their home planet to the point that they'll only have about 50 years of oxygen yet left. So, Spock hears about this and thinks like, hey, why don't we, maybe help the Klingons out a bit and, see if maybe we can end this whole war that we've been going through with them all this time. So, obviously, Kirk's against it, right? He's like, well, just let them die, right? Let them die, right? Don't trust them. Don't believe them, right? So he's against this, but they're like, well, we're going to send you, Kirk, because we know, they know you don't like us. It's kind of like the Nixon thing, right? We're going to send Nixon to China. We're going to send Kirk to go get the Klingons. So what his job is, he's got to go bring the Klingon Chancellor back to Earth to meet with the Federation president, who's played by Kurtwood Smith, right? Bitches Leave from RoboCop. You may also know him as that 70s show dad, Kurtwood Smith. Most infamous Kurtwood Smith moment, I think, for me was he was on this VH1 show that would get like a group of celebrities and sit them around a table in front of an audience and talk about music, and there would be like a topic or a theme. So this one that Kurtwood Smith was on was like best cover songs of all time, and he said Eric Clapton's acoustic version of Layla was the best cover of all time, essentially saying he was covering his own song because he was singing it he was singing acoustically as opposed to with electric guitar. So that was Kurtwood Smith if you need him. And so anyway, he's the Federation president, and they're bringing the Chancellor. The Chancellor is David Tennant, who you may remember from the previous film, right? He was the Federation ambassador on Nimbus 3. Now he is the Klingon Chancellor. We've also got Christopher Plummer, right? We gotta love Christopher Plummer. He is the the Klingon baddie with the eye patch and everything. So he is there in all of his Shakespearean glory. So Kirk's job is to bring them back to Earth. He gets after it. He goes and picks everybody up. We've got a new Vulcan on the ship, Kim Cattrall, playing Valeris. So she is this Vulcan prodigy that Spock is excited to have her on the ship, and he's expecting good things from her. Anyway, pick up the Klingons. They have a very tense dinner around some Romulan ale and jokes about Hitler and Shakespeare. And then once that's done, next thing you know, a torpedo is being launched from the Enterprise and being shot at the Klingon warbird that's got the Chancellor. How did that happen, right? Nobody seems to know. And then a couple of Starfleet officers in moon boots. Remember moon boots from the 80s? Well, apparently that's, they've got some kind of they've got, when the torpedo hits the Klingon bird of prey, it knocks out the gravity on the ship. But these moon boots allow you to they magnetically attach to the ground. So those 80s moon boots, you gotta love those making a comeback in 1991. And they go on the ship and they start just phasering people, spraying the whole area with, they're essentially painting the walls with Klingon purple blood. And they kill the Chancellor. So, Kirk and McCoy go on the ship to see if they can help. And they're like, well, hey, you're under arrest. We think you're the ones who killed the Chancellor. So, Kirk gets put on trial. I had read that this Kirk trial thing was actually the original idea for number 4. And they just decided not to do it and decided to do the idea that they had for number 4, which ended up working out really well. I think it's probably the second best film in the series. Really good story. But they had originally planned on doing this whole Klingons put Kirk on trial. And so, interestingly enough, that Christopher Plummer is the prosecutor, which I guess, he's not only is he a Klingon general, but he's a prosecutor. And then Worf's grandfather is the defense attorney. You got to love hearing Michael Dorn. Michael Dorn saying anything is fantastic, but definitely hearing him try to defend Kirk and McCoy is great. But they get sent to the prison planet of Rurapenthi, I believe it is. It's like out on it's technically deep in space, but it's on an Alaskan iceberg. Not ice. Yeah, it's. That's not the term that I want. It's not iceberg, but glacier. It's on an Alaskan glacier. So they're going there. At the same time, Spock's like, this can't be what happened. We need to investigate, right? And so they're turning the ship upside down, trying to figure out what's going on here. So they're working on that. Also, in the meantime, Spock attached a tracer kind of thing to the back of Kirk, so that way, if they ever kind of get in an area where they can be read, he can find them and beam them off the prison planet. So when they get on the prison planet, they befriend Iman, right? David Bowie's spouse. So you gotta love Iman. I love seeing her in anything. They befriend her, and she's like, hey, I'll help you guys get out of here, but I need your help. I know how to get out of here, but I need a couple, you guys to get me off the ship once we get there. So they start to kind of break out, and as they get outside of this magnetic field that prevents people from beaming people, Kirk realizes, like, hey, I think she's the one who's supposed to try to assassinate us, right? Because there's this idea that there's a bounty on Kirk and McCoy's head in Rurapenthi, and he figures out that it's her that probably did. And sure enough, the Klingons show up, and they're getting ready to kill them. And so then what happens is that just as the Klingons are about to kill Kirk and Spock. Kirk and McCoy, Spock shows up and he beams them off the planet. So at this stage, right now that everybody's back together, they're kind of piecing this thing together, kind of putting the pieces, getting everything to fit, and they realize, okay, we think we know who the person on the inside. So there's somebody inside the Federation who did things on their end, and then of course there's the Klingons who did the bad things. They discover it's Kim Cattrall, kind of saw it coming. Unfortunately, it was Kim Cattrall was the inside person who did this, and so after Spock mind melds with her, which director Nicholas Meyer said he was uncomfortable with that scene, seeing it after. He felt it was almost like a torture scene, almost like a waterboarding thing to get information out of her. It is a bit of an intense scene. Nicholas Meyer, remember, he directed number 2, and then didn't come back for number 3 because he wasn't happy that Spock was coming back to life, and then Spock pushed it so he could be the director. Directed 3 and 4. Shatner comes back for number 5, and then there was a sense that maybe that Nimoy would do this one. But then there was a sense that might upset Shatner because number 5 went so poorly that to give it back to Nimoy would almost be like a sign of like, you couldn't handle this. Let's have Nimoy come back in. So like Nimoy was executive producer and writer on it, and then Nicholas Meyer from number 2 is coming back to direct it. So that's kind of, and I guess Nicholas Meyer also, I'll kind of get into this in a little bit, but he was told that he was going to have a bigger budget than he had, which ended up not working out for him so well. So anyway. So Nicholas Meyer felt that scene where he's like mind melding with her to kind of get the information. He felt it was a little bit rough. But anyway, she coughs up the information, at least of where this big meeting, because they're having this meeting again with the chancellor's daughter has been promoted to chancellor, and so there's a fear that like, okay, well, if they have this meeting again, somebody will try to assassinate the new chancellor and just kind of start the process over. And so our heroes get there in the nick of time and save the day, get everybody, arrest everybody that's a baddie, and call it good. And that's it. Everybody lives happily ever after, and we get that beautiful credit sequence where we get everybody's signatures. I don't know about you, my signature is essentially 2 lines and 2 dots for the I's in Poirier. That's what my signature looks like, and I think that's kind of what a lot of our people our age. I grew up learning how to write in cursive, but like I didn't write. The only time I remember really, really writing in cursive was in 8th grade. Our 8th grade English teacher said that when you get to high school, all your papers have to be in cursive. And she made us write, like, all of our papers in cursive. And I remember when I got to high school, I remembered that. I'd forgotten all about it. I went through my freshman year of high school. My freshman year of English was interesting anyway because our teacher, fortunately, she was ill. And so she was out a lot. And we had this playwright who was like subbing in, like a long-term sub, and had no idea what he was doing. I remember we were watching Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, and what we would do is every time we'd come in, we'd tell him that we weren't past a certain point, so we could see the scene where Juliet's naked, we see her boobs. We kept being like, no, rewind it back to that point. We used to play craps. We'd have like a book or something, and we would roll craps because he just didn't know what he was doing. So that was freshman English. But then sophomore, we had a little bit more lucid of a teacher, though I don't know how lucid, to be honest, because I remember when I went to England, she was one of the chaperones for our trip to England when I was a senior, and she was hammered a good point to the time. I remember I bought a bottle of Jack Daniels at the Jack Daniels plant because we were in Scotland. Bought my dad a bottle of Jack Daniels, and of course I couldn't bring it through customs because I wasn't 21, not knowing that nobody was going to check my bag. Nobody ended up checking my bag for anything, but I gave it to her to get through customs for me, and then I was going to get it after. Suddenly she, quote, lost it at her house, close quote. And so, yeah, she pounded that thing. She totally took, I say, more lucid than the teacher that was letting us roll craps because he didn't know what he was doing, but, anyway. But I asked her, I was like, I had a teacher in 8th grade who said that you only require, that you made people do their papers in cursive. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what she's talking about. I don't know where she got that idea from. None of us here, none of the English department in any of the grades require anybody to write their papers in cursive. So I don't remember the last time I wrote anything out in cursive. But you can see the difference, right, with these actors who were all born in the 20s and 30s. We're used to writing that way for a long time. They have these beautiful signatures, and even people that are younger. Like if you look at basketball players who played in the '80s, like Larry Bird or Magic Johnson, beautiful signature whenever they sign anything, and they're used to repeating it, right? Because they've got to autograph things, and so they've got it down. But it looks amazing, Whereas me with my 2, if I ever become famous, I don't think I'm ever become famous, but I've just got like 2 lines and 2 dots. But it was a beautiful thing to watch the credits and see that. And there was that sense that like this was it, right? That this was going to be the end. And I think they had talked about trying to maybe do some linking things between this one and Next Generation, because Next Generation is really starting to move at this point, right? It's become really popular, and they knew that that's where they were going next, was Next Generation movies. I think before that they were kind of not sure if they were going to use the characters for movies. I know Roddenberry was against it because Roddenberry didn't. He wanted to protect Next Generation from the films because he felt like the films took Trek away from him when they started making the movies. Because he was forced out of these movies. They didn't want his input. And so he didn't want the same thing to happen to Next Generation. But he ends up passing away right before this film comes out. I know Nicholas Meyer, I guess, had an argument with him, not knowing that he was that close to death. And he felt guilty about the argument when they had about what the movie's direction. But there was talk about maybe having Picard, and then they realized, Picard wouldn't even been born yet, with the way his age versus when this took place. So I think they ended up deciding, okay, we'll just do Generations in 2 years, and that's how we'll link the two, and then we'll start doing movies with them. the other thing, of course, is that, there were some rumors about maybe killing Kirk off in this one, which, of course, he ends up dying in the next one in Generations. But they talked about that, like, maybe we'll kill him off here. And once the fans heard about that, they lost it. They're like, no, we don't want that. And to be honest, I don't think you need that. You don't need to be killing people off just because you're ending series. Let's just let everybody ride off into the sunset and autograph give us their autographs in the credit sequence. That's enough to do it. And I think every show and movie should do that. That should be the way everything ends nowadays, right? Like, it should just be like the last episode of Mad Men or Sopranos or something like that. Like, they should just, in the credits, just had, there's Tony Soprano's signature, or James Gandolfini's signature. Like, that's a great way to end things. I really like that. A few things kind of, as we're thinking about, like, sort of, where Trek kind of goes from here. So this movie, like the previous one, is not a top 10 earner for the year it comes out in 1991. I think it just kind of misses Hot Shots. So Hot Shots was 100, which, it's kind of crazy, right? The Hot Shots was the number 10 movie the year that year. It grossed 180 million. This, actually, I say just missed. It missed by a good 90 million. Which is a good amount of money, right, to miss by 90 million. So it wasn't. It didn't top 10. And again, nothing since number 4 has been a top 10 earner. So that includes the Next Generation films. That includes those 3 new Chris Pine films. None of them were top 10 earners. I don't think none of them were over 500 million either. They're all kind of, I think the closest was, like, there's one in, like, the 400s, one of the early ones. There might have been one that went 500. There might have been one that was over. I think maybe the second one might have been that bigger. The first or second one of them was big enough. But again, they still weren't top 10 earners. So, I think with this one is you're getting the sense that you're sort of ending something here, that, like, this cast is done, and that, yes, they're maybe going to, I don't remember at the time if they had said for sure that they were going to make Generations with the, as like a handoff movie. I don't know if they had known for sure when they made this that was where they were going to go, or if they were just like, okay, this is it for this crew. We're done making movies with them, and this is kind of them signing off, which I'm okay with. I would have been okay with that. I don't necessarily know that I would have needed Generations to be what Generations was, but maybe I need to see it again to know, because I don't think I've seen that one since it was in the theater. Because I did see that one in the theater. I think I saw all of the Star Treks between this one up through the second of the new ones. I saw them all in the theater. So I think it was just that third one, the one that came out in 2016, that I didn't catch in the theater. But I think everything else, so all the Next Generation ones I saw in the theater, some one way or another. Usually it was like a cheap theater thing. Usually it was one of those deals where I let it kind of marinate in the theater for a bit, and then drop down to those Tuesday night dollar deals. That's, I think, how I saw most of those Next Generation ones. But anyway, but yeah, I think, when we get into here to 1991. One of the things to keep in mind is this is the 25th anniversary year for Star Trek, which is kind of crazy to think, right? I was trying to think of, like, what would be another, 25th, like, when you think of, like, the comic book movies, right? They kind of still, like Spider-Man, for example, is 02, so we're not quite 25 years on that yet. But that's, Sopranos, I think, started in 99, right? I think that would have been, we're 25th anniversary of that starting, being, that's its first year. I'm pretty sure, right? That doesn't that sound right? That it would have been 99. But anyway, it's kind of crazy to think, right? That we think of Star Trek as being so long ago, right? Being in the 60s, but in 1991, it was only 25 years. But the other thing to keep in mind is that Sopranos was 99, so that's, we're coming from the 25th anniversary of The Sopranos the same way, or 30 years, right? 30 years of Pulp Fiction. But Star Trek was coming up on 25 years, this movie was meant to sort of cap that 25th year or 25th anniversary celebration. And Star Trek overall was doing really well at this point, right? Because the Next Generation was strong. It was like I think it was the top syndicated show on television at that time. It was really popular, and I think there was a sense that, like, okay, yes, we had a rough go of it in number 5. I think there was some talk about not doing a number 6 because number 5 was so poor. But I think with how well Next Generation was starting to do, and with the fact that this was the 25th anniversary of Star Trek overall, I think there was a sense of, like, let's give it a try. Let's do this and see if we can do one more and kind of end this the way we want to end it. It's interesting to think about when you think of, again, we're talking about 25 years. In that 25 years, Star Trek was one of the things that was sort of starting the fan ecosystem that we know today as what it is. Again, we talked about this in the previous segment. There weren't a lot of other games in town, right? Star Trek was the big one, right? I mean, it was like a lot of times you'd think of like almost like there's like a two thing, right? It was like Star Trek or Star Wars, right? Those were kind of the big ones. I guess there was also I would say like a Marvel thing. But Marvel, like, comic book thing, right, wasn't the same because there weren't movies. But, comic book fans were like their own kind of geek. Like, I know from my own experience, like, as a fan of comics, like when you're a fan of one of these kinds of things, right, that like when you reached a certain age, it wasn't considered cool anymore. Like, I remember 91, right, I was into comics at that time, more than Star Trek or Star Wars. And I can remember, having comics or something like that. And I remember like girls that I would like, they would draw like a Spider-Man on my those, you remember your book, your textbook that you'd have to like cover it in a paper bag, right? That for whatever reason they made you do that. And I remember, a girl drawing stuff, or girls doing stuff like that. When you get to 8th grade, high school, right? No girls doing that, right? No girl cares, which I guess is one of the differences because, I don't ever thought about this before, that maybe those girls liked comic books as well and then realized like, oh, I'm not supposed to like comics. There was like a sense of like thinking like I can't like comics that didn't really happen as much in the 2000s, or especially the late 2000s, 2010s, when the Marvel cinematic universe is taking off and it's like kind of more inclusive, right? That you get a lot of girls that are fans. I never really thought of that before. That here I am being like, well, I'm getting older. I'm supposed to be too cool for comics, so I'm gonna like not really like them or not be as open with the fact that I like them as I'm getting into high school. That there were girls who didn't suddenly didn't like them either. If maybe it was the same thing, right? That they almost like the two were like there's chicken and egg kind of thing, right? I didn't really think of it that way before. Just dawned on me as I was talking about it here. But anyway, there's a sense that these things aren't as cool. And what's interesting is Star Trek, because we're thinking about Star Trek 25 years after this. So we're now we're more than 25 years beyond this, right? we're what 30, almost 35 years past this. So we're like 32, I guess, past this. But in that 30 years, right? It's like Marvel and Star Wars have somehow transcended the geekdom a little bit, in a way that Star Trek never transcended it, right? Star Trek is still considered kind of a geeky thing that if you're into it, and not in a cool way, right? It's not a cool kind of thing the way that the other ones are. One of the things I remember in the late 2000s was my nephew, who just graduated from high school. So this was like '09. He was like 3 years old at the time, and my mom and I took him to the beach in York, Maine, and there was this arcade called Funorama that's near the beach, and it's been pretty much the same arcade since I was going there in like the late 90s, early 2000s, including all the arcade games are pretty much the same. And I would go and like maybe try to play Galaga. The thing I don't like about their Galaga, I'm a fan. When I play Galaga, I want a Galaga that I can shoot as fast as I can tap the button. Some Galagas are set up that you can only shoot 3 at a time, and then it pauses and it shoots another 3 at a time. And I don't like that kind of Galaga. So, and their Galaga was like that. So I wasn't a fan of it. There's a truck stop in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, my buddy and I used to go to. They had a full-on, like, you just, as long as you hit it, it would fire. And that was a great one. I think my highest score was like 2.8 million one time. So yeah, double rollover like that. You got to love that kind of deal. But anyway, one of the games they had there was this like kind of, booth shoot-up Star Trek game. I think it was based off Voyager, actually, but the way it worked was you go inside this like little curtained off booth area, you pull the guns out and you got this big screen and you shoot the Borg, right? And you're shooting the Borg. And my nephew and I were sitting on this bench shooting the Borg, and he loved it. He thought it was the greatest thing. He wanted to know everything about Star Trek. Just, Uncle Matt, I'm sitting in my car seat, just tell me everything there is to know about Star Trek. And I was telling him all the characters and Picard and Worf and Data and all that stuff, and going into all of it. I was kind of, it was all Next Generation more than it was original Trek anyway, because I think those were the characters that were in it. Maybe it wasn't Voyager, maybe it was Next Generation, and that's why he was seeing them and I was telling him about those characters. But anyway, my sister comes to pick him up and hears him talking about Star Trek, and she's like, no, we're not doing Star Trek. So his father, her ex-husband, he was into like Marvel and Star Wars stuff, and I guess that was cool enough, that was okay, but no, we're not doing Star Trek. And he was in agreement. Like, we're not, no, you can't teach him Star Trek. There's no Star Trek stuff. And I wonder how much of that's out there, because I do feel like one of the things is that Star Trek kind of missed that boat of the sort of the mainstreaming of geek, right? That, comic books that used to be, in sixth grade, a girl could draw a Spider-Man on my book. In high school, she'd be way too cool to do anything, even consider something like that, right? That kind of got normalized a bit more in the 2000, late 2000s to the 2010s, and Star Trek was never a part of that. It never got that kind of that normalization. I think they tried for it, right? They tried because they rebooted Star Trek in that same period. I mean, '09 is the same year that Iron Man comes out, is when they released that reboot Star Trek with Chris Pine. And you look at those three movies, they do successively worse, I think, than the previous ones. And you can just look at the world at that time, where they're just getting drowned out by everything else, because it's not just Marvel, right? It's Marvel, it's the Batman movie, it's Hunger Games. I want to say there was like a Hobbit movie that was coming out at that time, Jurassic Park sequel. Everything was just killing Star Trek. Star Trek just didn't have any place to go. I kind of wonder, where it's going to go from here. Watching it in '91 and having to remind myself that Star Trek was one of the big ones at that time. It was one of the top. And you can make a movie like Trekkies, and have Star Trek as this worldwide, multi-billion-dollar phenomenon, which I guess it still is, right? I mean, I think it still generates that kind of revenue. But, I mean, I don't think you'll ever see a Star Trek movie that pulls $1 billion in the theater. I don't think that'll ever happen. I don't think you're ever going to have a Star Trek TV show that has the kind of buzz that, like, Mandalorian has, or WandaVision, or something like that. I don't know that Star Trek's ever going to be that kind of thing. And I think as I was watching this last of the movies, and taking myself back to 1991 and thinking, like, yeah, it didn't happen for them. The fact that, again, that, like, we blame number 5 for hurting the series or whatever. But, I mean, they had all of these movies to recover from number 5, and none of them were top 10 earners. They all, for the most part, did 9 figures in the theater, but they were not, you weren't getting any breakouts. And I don't think, I don't know if there's really necessarily any excuse for it when you consider that, like, Fast and Furious breaks through and is, like, billion-dollar earners. So if you could pull something out of nothing with Fast and the Furious, and that series, and you can pull billion-dollar earners out of that, but you can't with an established franchise from the it comes as far back as the mid-'60s, and you can't pull that tradition to pull those kind of numbers. I think it is. I mean, because even DC, right? Even DC has billion-dollar earners and things like Aquaman. So and obviously Batman, Dark Knight. So I don't know, and so I'm finding myself as I'm watching these going like, okay, well, where do we go from here with Star Trek? I've been watching Picard. I watched the first season. I thought it was good. I'm kind of curious how the second season is going to go. But I got sidetracked. So I'm watching The Bear. I mean, it's another thing too, right? Is that when you think about TV in the late '80s, early '90s, right? Star Trek Next Generation was kind of prestige TV at that time. It was kind of I'm trying to think of what else was going on in the '90s TV-wise that would have been better than Star Trek. I mean, Seinfeld, right? Seinfeld, of course, it was a big show at that time. Cheers was still on then, so Cheers would have been a big deal. But it's not like today where I'm like, oh, I'm going to watch The Bear, or I'm going to binge Succession. That's the other thing too, right? Is I've got so many shows that I can watch that have been around for a while. So I don't know, and I don't know if there's any talks about making a new Star Trek movie. I mean, I think the other thing too, from Paramount's standpoint, is they don't have a lot of properties that pull in a lot of money. I mean, I think Jurassic Park is theirs, right? And Mission Impossible. Actually, I don't know if Jurassic Park is theirs. That's a good question, but I know Mission Impossible is, right? That's a big one for them, and so. Oh no! Jurassic Park is Universal, so that's not a Paramount one. But Transformers is Paramount, right? So they're kind of their 3, right? Mission Impossible, Transformers, Star Trek. None of them are really kind of big deals, but I think there's this sense with Star Trek that, like, oh, we've got this this massive fan base here that we should be able to activate and monetize somehow to this big extreme. But it hasn't turned over the way that that the other ones have, the way that Star Wars and Marvel have, where they've got new audiences. Now, granted, when you look at those two, they're scrambling a bit because they're losing Gen Z, right? They don't feel like they're getting the Gen Z audience. And where that hurts, I think, for them is that when you've got their audience from the late 2000s, early 2010s, who were, we think of them as sort of the younger millennials, if they're in their 20s then, they're in their 30s now. They've got kids, they don't have the disposable income or the time available to go see 3 Marvel movies a year like they used to, and now they're starting to kind of cut back and only trying to see one thing or another. And so I think there's a sense of like, okay, well, how do we get these younger kids that have more time on their hands to go see more of this stuff, right? How do we introduce them to these kinds of things more? But Trek lost it before that, right? Trek lost, not only they lost Gen Z, but they were losing millennials, right? I don't think there are millennials that are into Star Trek either. And so they had lost it before that. And I think that was something that, coming back to 91, was like, okay, I kind of was reminded of the fact that Star Trek was bigger than Marvel, right? I mean, Marvel was like trying to stay afloat financially. Of course, you think about 91, right? 91 is around the time that Image forms, when you get this massive exodus of Marvel talent to form Image, and that kind of crushed their sales at the same time that they were flooding the market with like double reverse holograms and things like that to try to drive up the whole, secondary market, the speculative market or whatever. And then, a couple of years later, DC kills off Superman, right? So, comic books in general, I mean, of course, from DC's standpoint, right, they had their own sort of thing going with Batman, which, starts in 89 for them. They suddenly got this cash cow in Batman that they weren't expecting. They still want to make it happen somehow with Superman. And I think the Batman success didn't translate to the comics as much as they would have wanted, which I think is something that sort of happened with Marvel's, with the movies. They didn't always translate to the comic books, but they make so much off the movies and the merchandising and all that other stuff that it doesn't matter. But Star Trek was one of the big ones at that time, and I guess I don't know if it was just sort of plodding along through the 90s, because in the 90s it was still big, right? You were still getting TV, after Next Generation ends, you still got Deep Space Nine, and then you get Voyager, and I guess you start to see cracks in the armor when Enterprise comes out, right? Because that one wasn't so successful. And then, those Next Generation movies, none of those really did well. And then, I mean, they did well enough, right? They did well enough, but they weren't like these big, again, they weren't big kind of blockbusters that I think Paramount would want from that kind of movie. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that 91 was when the wave crests, right? I think in 91, we think the wave is still kind of going. I think there was a sense that Trek was going to keep, Trek was kind of unstoppable, and it was just going to keep moving along like this. I don't know what happens, I mean, I'm assuming, Paramount's going to keep producing these TV shows, and I'm assuming there must be enough of a market for them that it's worth it to keep the shows on, right? That the people there are enough fans of Star Trek like that. But I mean, I don't know how, but how do you get to that next level where you've suddenly got tons of fans watching the movies? So I don't know. As I'm wrapping up here, I want to mention a cameo in this. There's actually supposed to be 2 cameos in this. Interestingly enough, we were supposed to get Whoopi Goldberg in a cameo. She was going to play one of the Klingons, and Leonard Nimoy was like, "No, we can't have her in this. She's too big. You can't have her doing a cameo role." So she's out, right? She can't do a cameo. Well, at the same time, a woman named Mary Jo Slater is the casting director for this movie, and she finds, she knows that her son, Christian, is a huge fan of Star Trek. So we get a scene where a communications officer wakes Sulu out of bed to tell him that, hey, nobody's heard from the Enterprise, you need to talk to Starfleet. That communications officer is Christian Slater, and it's kind of darkened. It's a little bit shaded over, but it's definitely Christian Slater. And he was as big a star, maybe not as big a star as Whoopi Goldberg at the time, but he was big enough. So I wonder what Whoopi Goldberg thought when she saw that. I mean, granted, she ends up being on Next Generation, but I wonder how she felt about that. Like, oh, Leonard Nimoy said that you can't have me in it because it's too big, and then here's Christian Slater getting his little spot in there. Anyway, but it's a fun cameo. I loved seeing him in that spot. To see him there, that was always good there. And I was kind of reminded of, I'd kind of forgotten about it, and then I saw it in here again. I just see Christian Slater just about anything, so that always works out there. But yeah, so I guess, final thoughts as we're wrapping this up. I mean, I kind of gave a lot of my final thoughts there, kind of with the whither Trek, where Trek goes, and I mean, there's still a good 7 movies after this, right? So they keep trying after this, and it's I think there's a sense that, like, they know the fans are out there, and they feel like, okay, we can just kind of keep doing it. And the movies don't lose money, but they don't make a lot of money either, right? And I think for Star Trek to have had top 10 earners throughout the 80s, and then with number 5 suddenly not, and not ever have one again, I think if you're Paramount, if you're one of these, it's one thing for like a John Wick to be successful but not be a top 10 earner, right? It's one thing to have something like that. But when you're Paramount and you've got 3 kind of main franchises, and here's Star Trek, it's supposed to be one of these big heritage franchises, one of the first major franchises that we know of in fandom. You feel like that audience is worth more, but I feel like there's also a shift there, and I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I think if they keep making these shows, maybe one of them will catch. And it'll play to, I think part of the thing with one of them, I think it's Discovery. They're trying to have a kind of a more diverse cast to maybe play on Gen X sensibilities a little bit more, and make them kind of feel more included in it. But I don't know. I don't know that Gen Z. I said Gen X, Gen Z. I don't know. I don't know that there's much into that kind of thing either. I don't know. So I don't know. I don't know if you're Star Trek. I don't know what you do to try to get more younger fans. Because it might be like Star Trek might be kind of going the way of baseball here in the United States, where it's just sort of, it was a bigger thing at one time. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm sure if there was a Star Trek convention here, I haven't been to a convention before. I've never done that before. It'd be kind of an interesting thing to do, just to kind of go see and maybe take the temperature of some of the fans there. Or the other thing too, that when they have conventions here in Philadelphia at the convention center, that convention center is across the street from the Trader Joe's I go to on the weekends. So sometimes I see fans in there. I should just next time there's a Star Trek convention, just go in. Anytime I see somebody in a uniform or dressed like a Klingon, picking out some Trader Joe's snacks, go up and ask them, like, hey, what do you think? Like, where do you think Trek is going here? I don't know. Be like Mr. Roving Man on the street and kind of report back to you here on the podcast. But anyway, I've been going on for a good amount here. We're already 45 minutes into this second piece here. The other one was 30 minutes, so we're a little over an hour here. So why don't we wrap this up? Thank you, everybody, for listening. You can find me at dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. It's really where you can find everything. But the novel, Don's House in the Mountains, that's the new one that's out. Hoping to get something out new. So my plan this year is to get out a novella called Nadia and Aiden, about a fraternal twins whose mom is from America, but they grew up in France. They come to America in the late 2000s to kind of explore their American heritage. It's a fun story. I'm hoping to have that out sometime in the fall, so we'll see if that happens. But at least for now, it's still Don's House in the Mountains, so if you want to pick that up, I'd be forever grateful. Also, we have a thread list, so it's getting warm here in the United States, probably in Europe, maybe Southern Hemisphere, maybe it's a little cooler, so maybe you want to spend a little extra, get one of those hoodies. You can always do that as well, or get one of those mugs for your warm beverages, right? That always helps as well. But thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll be back soon. All right, bye, everyone.